Hi everyone, welcome to round 8 of Australs. My name is Joel. I'm the chair of this round. My preferred pronouns are they and them. I'll let Gautam introduce himself.
Hi, my name is Gautam. Panelists preferred pronoun be him, but obviously refer to the panel as a whole if you do address us. Good luck, everyone.
All right, thank you very much. Can we have the first affirmative speaker to speak on the motion? Here.
Hi. Am I audible or heard? Okay, I'll just open my camera and check if I'm still seen. Okay. Hi. Okay. I'll start my speech in a few seconds. Please refer to me as she, her. Okay. I'll start my speech. Sorry. Okay. I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. The elections in the US and the current shift of majority of the voters on whether or not who they are likely to vote has constantly been a controversial issue, especially when majority of the way that we see the world, majority of the am I lagging? Sorry. Oh, I think I'm lagging. Oh. Hello?
You're fine.
Okay, I think we lagged. Oh wait. Would it be okay for me to restart my speech?
Yeah,
If
sure.
ever? Okay, sorry.
If I turn off my camera, it means that I'm probably lagging as well. So yeah, it's been an issue throughout the tournament, so it's fine. Yeah, continue.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry. And then I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1, go. The elections in the US and the way that ideologies and and how the voters are understanding who and whether or not they should vote, the shift within that is generally a very important thing that we have to consider within this debate. And generally, we have to talk about which supporters should we prioritize in the sense that majority of the laws that are likely to be passed are likely to affect the general society, right? A few definitions before I move on with my argumentation. One, we think that the center-left party, when it comes to liberal democracies, would probably look like individuals who are likely to compromise. So it looks like people like Biden. But understand that the supporters that are supporting the center-left in the US or in the status quo would probably look like or exist in two folds of spectrum. One, it probably looks like people are educated or progressive elites, but also people who are not necessarily convinced on the radical left, but they're still progressive at the end of the day. But secondly, some people who want to resort to the center left because they feel like the radical part of that spectrum is not as palatable, but they still want to at least push majority of their incentives as a progressives and as educated, more educated people, right? What is the conclusion to this specific mechanism? One, it means that there's still an incentive for them to remain centrist but also leftists at the same time. So meaning they have their own interests that specifically aligned to the party. It's quite unlikely that they're going to change, right? But secondly, we think that the place that this debate occurs would probably look like rich Western countries like the US or the UK, right? But thirdly, we think that when it comes to specifically talking about the policy, which means like we're explicitly seeking electoral gains, it probably looks like it's apparent who the target audiences are. So it means that it's visible that we are targeting less educated voters. But we think that there are specific changes that will be made in how the party is likely to campaign themselves. And I'll further expound that in my first argumentation. But secondly, we think that the less educated voters are probably people who suffer from the structural barriers within society. So one, there's information asymmetry. Thirdly, they're likely to be forcibly indulged with so much misinformation because that's how majority of the people in the other side feel like they want to weaponize that information specifically. So it means that there's already a structural barrier. The only thing that they need is someone to take that initiative in order to break that, right? But lastly, the electoral gains would probably look like a far more buy-in, their political participation within their interest, right? So therefore, that's the final setup within this argumentation. The first argument is that the basic incentive to every party is to gain more voters, right? We think that voters are a prerequisite for legislation. So it means that the people or legislations or for more important seats. So it probably looks like the inherency of a position of not just yours, but four more people or 10 more people or majority of your party getting that into these seats. It's allowing you or it's the prerequisite for you to get that power and influence on how four more people are likely to vote for the interests or the policies that you're likely to campaign in the Senate. But secondly, at the point in which it seeks electoral gains, that's where we one lessen the support from the conservatives or from the other kinds of or the enemy party that is likely to take majority of the positions, which means that you're unlikely to get your interest. We lessen that support when we gain those electoral gains. But secondly, it looks like the long term where we expand the influence of our own party. That's the point in which we establish that kind of policies that we want to have. So when we move on to the policy on what does seeking electoral gains to really look like and why it is effective in converting majority of these less educated voters. One, it looks like educating consumers that are probably less educated, those who are suffering from information asymmetry, are probably less educated. So it probably looks like responding to them from one, having more infographics about your own campaign, having infographics about these societal issues that probably looks like why climate change is real, why abortion doesn't necessarily or abortion is necessary in the sense that children like 5 to 10 children die each day, right? But secondly, it probably looks like going to house, going to them and having events that allow these people in the party to speak about themselves, to converse and interact with majority of these less educated voters within rural areas, within people that are not necessarily elites or in the middle class or privileged, right? But secondly, the second thing that it looks like is that personal branding and relativity within your market. So it looks like highlighting the target of your specific campaigns. So what issues do they want to necessarily respond to? How does the people in this center left changes the less educated voters' lives? So it looks like providing tangible changes on what is likely to happen when they vote for them. So one, it probably looks like they're likely to get more jobs. It's targeting majority of those good things in their campaign. But thirdly and lastly, we think that it looks like there's lesser antagonism between these lesser educated voters. So on the comparative on opposition, they will likely, still resort to the status quo where they campaign for Facebook to remove them of the freedom of speech to talk about societal issues because they think that there are toxic people within the community. But on our end, we won't call them stupid or people who create, unfactual theories. We won't make them protest or anything else. We would put them into a less antagonism, which means that we're far more interactive and a bit more generous to them, right? How is this likely to convert voters? One, we think that when you specifically or realistically use your own resources to cater to that beliefs, and because we've told you that it's likely to be far more visible because we explicitly show that to these people, to these less educated voters, we think that the psyche of these voters, these less educated voters, are likely to feel that they are wanted or feel like they want to vote for them in the sense that when we utilize majority of the media channels, they feel like they already know them as well. But secondly, because you explicitly brand yourselves in terms of relativity, when you make yourself more interactive in the sense that you go to their house, you make face-to-face events and talk about your campaigns, it creates a patronic relationship with voters as it builds majority of your relationship into something like reciprocity, where if you vote for me, I'm likely to help you even more. And that's through these tangible benefits. But lastly, understand that personality and modern politics is somehow inseparable already in status quo, meaning the more you stand out and the more that you make yourself palatable to less educated voters that probably don't already know you or probably have already seen you in the bad light because of misinformation, and the fact that you use your resources to somehow destroy that by showing who you are, I feel like that's the point in which you convert them into knowing what they're able to gain from voting you, right? In conclusion, you're likely to convert voters, and that's the importance of it because you're likely to get more seats in the Senate. On the second argumentation on why it's far more harmful on the counterfactual. One, we think that polarization is far more likely to happen on negative in the sense that when you look at their own counterfactual or in the info slide where there's less educated voters that are likely to vote for conservative people, the fact that you remain less educated or the fact that you don't break majority of these structural barriers because you don't necessarily do anything and you don't change your campaign. One, there's the proximity of fake news is far more near. So things like the climate change isn't real will still remain in the media channels. But secondly, the directness of harm will happen in the way that they don't change explicitly, or they don't explicitly seek why these less educated voters should change or should have the benefit. So they have to agree that they will still be far more antagonized, in the sense that a lot of people will hate them, which means that, you know, in general society there's just lesser things to happen in the sense. But thirdly, we think that it's harmful in the sense that center left parties, even if they are elected, it's less worse, or it's far more neglected, because it continues the cycle in which majority of these less educated voters are at the point in which they bid for bad future elections. They bid for conservative, you know, certain conservative policies that they aren't even aware going to affect them in the long run. We think that with those kinds of long-term harm and how it affects the general society in the present, we think that's a world where we have to propose. With all of those reasons and more, affirm.
All right, we thank that speaker for that speech. Can we have the next speaker to introduce the next case? Here.
Yeah, hi, I'm Harsh. I'll be the first negative speaker. We'll start in about 30 seconds. And could someone confirm if I'm audible? Okay. We'll start in 3, 2, 1. It's funny how the affirmative mentions Joe Biden as being one of the representatives of the center-left party trying to appease both sides of the paradigm in this political spectrum, when the fact is that Joe Biden has been the least popular president in modern times of the United States. Let me just remind the panel again that this is an actor motion. And what we have to prove is that which side provides the most benefits to our center-left party. Let me just complete some frame. Let me just add some framing into this debate that the affirmative have not done. How would this campaign by the center-left party look like to woo the right-wingers? They come up and tell you how they're going to go from door to door, house to house, and educate people about climate change and against misinformation and other issues to develop relationships between the parties and voters. Firstly, this is so impractical that it's laughable. Understand, both sides have very set views that are not going to change. We have seen how both the right wing and the left wing have sets of views, and how they're extremely adamant and arrogant, how they're adamant about their views. They're not going to change very easily. And secondly, how is this even feasible in the very near future? How are you going to educate in incredible speed in the next 1 or 2 years to win the next election and educate about issues regarding misinformation and climate change, views that they believe are their very own? How are you going to change that for half of the fucking country? How are you going to change that in the United States case for 175 million people? How is this even feasible in the next 5 to 10 years, let alone the next 1, 2 years? If this was possible, won't all parties have done that in status quo? When have you ever seen the Democratic Party go door to door in Texas to Republican houses to convince each one of them? You have not seen this because they know it's not possible. Let me tell you how this campaign would actually look like to woo the right wingers. This would mean the center-left party would become more rightist, in the sense that the party would obviously continue to support the main core issues, such as, say, abortion rights and, say, LGBTQ plus rights, etc. But they would have to give in to some stuff, say, like gun rights, or, say, lesser gun control, or stuff like, immigration policies, or universal healthcare, or environmental protection. There has to be some trade-off. They will have to give in somewhere to even try to appease these voters. And what we are going to prove to you is that this trade-off is going to alienate the original existing voter base. They say that polarization is going to happen more on our side. Number one, we've already proven to you how you can't educate voters nearly as soon as the opposition says going to door. We have proved to you how this is not feasible. And secondly, through our arguments, we're going to prove to you how polarization is going to be symmetric. This is because the affirmative wants to expand the center-left political parties' electoral gains in the future. But in this process, they do not realize what they're going to do is they're going to alienate their original voter base. And simultaneously, they're not going to really convince a majority of the right-wingers or the less educated voters, both of which go hand in hand, that they're trying to get electoral gains. Why is this? The reason why educated people are more likely to vote liberal is because the party caters specifically to these voters' needs. They look for inclusion, which such voters prioritize because they're educated. While lesser educated majority democrats feel cheated due to such measures. Similarly, in the case of, say, climate change, criminal justice system, foreign policy, etc., what is going to happen is they are much more likely to be anti-war and pacifists, while the less educated voter base will have a more gung-ho attitude and associate warfare with national pride and nationalism. The educated are more likely to question traditions, while the uneducated accept this because of their nationalistic behavior. Understand that both the right wing as well as the left wing which we now classify as educated because we are living in a liberal democracy, and the right wing which is generally associated by uneducated or lesser educated voters, have contradictory views. What are the core clashes? Say abortion rights, where we see the less educated or the right-leaning voters who are generally pro-life. We say gun rights, we talk about immigration policy, where the right wing are extremely anti-immigration. We talk about environmental protection, where what the left wing want to do is protect environment, stop oil fracking, etc., while the right wing want to continue to this because what they believe is they need to secure the nation's interest by having more employment. So universal healthcare, the left believe that country should have universal healthcare, the right do not believe this. Understand these contradictory issues are issues that are very core to both the parties. The educated and the liberal side is normally not willing to concede to their values, to their ideas and policies that they want to be implemented. Similarly, the right wing and the less educated voters are not willing to concede to their ideas that matter to them the most, which are, say, gun rights, say immigration rights, say unemployment, say the stuff about having lesser environmental laws and protection. Understand the opposition can't say that these views held by the right wingers are only held by the far-right voters, because most of the right-wingers believe in current gun laws and believe immigration should be curbed. For the educated liberal, which are the vast majority of the educated in status quo, as the info slide itself says, issues like universal healthcare and gun rights can't be conceded, and a center-left party campaigning without these in their manifestos will never receive support from their original voter base, that is the left-wingers. And what they would do, these left-wingers would slowly shift towards more radical left-wing parties. This is not only detrimental to the society because there's more polarization, unlike what the affirmative says, but more importantly, this is extremely detrimental to the central left party. Similarly, these parties wouldn't be able to, in fact, appease to these right wingers they're trying to appease, even those on the fence. Why? Many pieces of analysis. Firstly, these right wingers have developed into something they call, in recent terms, the anti-woke in the US, where they believe that, say, the gender pronouns, etc., will soon be mandated, and they're annoyed with these parties constantly showing support for gender minorities because they believe that these so-called woke people in general, what they want to do is they want to do away with gender, and some of these views are contradictory to their views, however bigoted they might be. Understand, secondly, they don't really like the left trying constantly to appease minorities, which they still would have to do in their side of the paradigm if they want the votes of such minority communities. And see, a good portion of them would not concede to major issues, say gun rights or immigration or abortion rights. This means that the center-left party would be in the middle of nowhere, with them not having completely gained the trust of these less educated or right-winger voters, and them completely having lost their voter base, their original voter base consisting of left-wingers, to more radical far-left parties. Understand, the affirmative cannot come up and say that voters would grudgingly vote for moderate left parties because they would still be better than the right, because number one, these people can stop voting altogether if these parties don't align with their views. They would stop going to the ballot, which would impact the moderate left more, and they might in fact switch to more radical parties. There will also be hardliners that become uncooperative with this, leading to divisions within the parties. Thirdly, independent candidates will start getting the votes of such alienated leftists, again being detrimental to that party, and independent voters will now swivel more towards the right or towards the radical left because they see the center left party as being a cheap imitation of the right. So in picking the right or an inferior copy of the right, they would pick the right or they would vote for the far left. Most importantly, these parties would again lose support from the minorities, not just from the majority population's left-wing and highly educated voters, but also from the minorities. Because no matter how educated minority voters are, they overwhelmingly vote left. because the leftists are the only parties that look for them. Regardless of level of education, the left imitating the right would mean a large chunk of minorities, would mean they would lose a large chunk of minority support. The minorities, even those who are completely moderate in the views but despise the right wingers, will need to shift towards more radical far left parties or will withdraw from the democratic process altogether, both of which will mean this party loses. In their side of the paradigm, polarization increases, the party loses votes. In our side of the paradigm, the party retains its original voter base, the party stands firmly with its core values, and the party originates not only the majority population's left-wing voter base, but also the minority communities. Thank you. The party is better on our side. Proud to oppose.
All right, thank you. Can we have the second affirmative speaker to continue the affirmative case here?
All right, I'll just get my timer and I'll start my speech in a few. Wait. Okay, there you go. Okay. I'll try and turn on my camera. All right. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1, go. The debate is a battle of interest, and we gave you on 2 levels what the incentive analysis coming from affirmative is. That 1, what is the inherent incentives of a political party, but 2, what is specifically the interest pertaining to center-left ideals. We think that the context at which this debate happens in liberal democracies, right, where freedom of speech is necessarily highly valuable to the people, we think it's a very big discussion to talk about how we both give these sides big platforms for both right-wing conservatives and for both like leftist ideals to like talk and discuss in discourse and to do what they want and say what they want. But that means as well that it's harder as a center left to stay on the same level at the point at which we know that lesser educated individuals are gaining more traction towards right-wing conservatives and populist leaders like Trump at the end of the day, right? So like to briefly like talk about what Elho has been talking about thus far is that they try to talk about things like, for example, the main case being that we lose original supporters because of the fact that we like adjust to the new, like, you know, these new electoral gains. But we think that we have to question first, what is the actual clash in the debate? Because it's not about the left catering solely to the right. We think that the debate is about the shift within the more educated and less educated voters, that these circumstances at which these voters believe changes because the trait that we're focusing on is necessarily on the educational attainment, not necessarily the fact that they are right-wing radicals. We think that that's what explicitly seeks mean, that we're pertaining to the adjective of that these less educated voters are the ones we want to cater to, and not necessarily just like the fact that they're right-wing radicals. We don't even know if they're right-wing radicals at the point at which they're just shifting to more right-wing ideas, but at the point at which they don't really say why they are the ones that are more likely to be the radicals, we don't understand why their case necessarily stands. But secondly, even if we engage on the best case about talking about how we lose the original supporter base because we immediately shift towards the other party and we make our policies more catered to the right. Firstly, we think that if we concede that there is still a large majority of supporters that exist within the center left that is still very much centrist or leftist, we still think that there is an incentive to keep it at least moderate to the point that we still allow these supporters to exist. But the point at which explicitly seeking doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to adjust all of our ideologies. And of course, that's the reason why we have in the first place. We still think that they'll go to Trump just because their original party doesn't cater to some of their policies, but the point at which it's going to be against their progressive ideals in the first place to just not vote at all or abstain, that's something that these supporters probably want or something that they believe in. So we think that it's not likely that we lose the original supporter base, or that even if we do lose them, it's not like they're going to go into the worst outcome, which is going to the right-wing conservatives at the end of the day, right? So going on to what exactly my PM has told you, because we think that it's still very important that they haven't engaged on what the important mechanisms is that we talked to you about explicitly seeking these new electoral gains, right? But firstly, the mechanism at which this happens, we think that explicitly seeking electoral gains with these less educated voters means that we have to question, what do these less educated voters struggle with in the first place? The fact is that they're less educated, that they don't have enough information regarding these social issues to create a rational decision in regards to their own beliefs, right? That we have to that means that if the party, the center left party, necessarily like would prioritize the information dissemination about the issues that people care about. For example, correcting conspiracy theories, correcting fake news about these issues, because that is the sole that is the sole trait that we think is the one that is like preventing these people from becoming center left. So at the point at which information is most likely the tool that, at which the center left uses in order to gain these electoral gains, we don't necessarily believe that we have to adjust all of our policies in order to become more right or right wing, right? So we think that it's the fact that the delta that comes here is that we come from a place that does not immediately push them away. That we know that in the status quo, the counterfactual that negative has to defend is the fact that we're going to be more divisive with our politics, that the fact that we're going to antagonize these people more because we know that they're less educated and they don't know enough about these things, but we tell them that because of the fact that we don't think that they're they're a priority to like cater to, we think that that's when we get more like villainization on both sides of the house at the end of the day, right? So when tell you that obviously center left parties or like in general parties still want supporters, we think that that's the most important interest for the for the actor in this motion. But secondly, when we told you that the harm that comes from polarization is much more harmful at the point at which one we just alienate all of these allies that we could possibly get, because the only thing that's like that the only barrier at which they're becoming a supporter is just through the information that we are not allowing them to have. But two, because of the, like identity politics that we necessarily identify these people towards, we think that it's much more better if we become more approachable and explicitly seek to gain their electoral gains and thus become more approachable to them as a party at the end of the day. But going on to like a few issues of what this debate should be about, because I want to question two things: what is the actual interest of the center left party, and two, on the question if it will succeed or not. I think that firstly, is it in the interest of the center left? We told you how the center left at the moment is at the tricky position because we know that the right wing is still being largely powerful in gaining supporters, especially in regards to the info side, when we know that the shift in education also like necessarily implies that these like less educated voters are gaining more of these supporters at the end of the day. So we think that even if we buy the best case of negative to say that okay, we adjust some of the policies to become a little bit more right wing, we think that either way more support is good, because that means that we still get more of the legislation and we still get more of the seats that we allow the center left politicians and elected people so in order to gain that position within the government in the first place. And we think that even at the point at which there are some policies that are going to be a little bit more leaning, we think that at the point at which the center left is going to be able to forward their other policies where there is more like unity towards it, we think that it's good that we are able to have that at the end of the day, and it's going to be in the long-term interest of the center left to still gain more supporters. So insofar as negative doesn't really claim how they get more supporters at their side, we don't know why it is always they're going to be priority to just keep loyal to what they already have when we know that they're already like dwindling in numbers at the end of the day, right? But secondly, on the question, like, will it work? We think that in the status quo, because of the fact that we have divisive politics, voters are likely to identify with what just the representative ideas or leaders are in their case, right? So we think that in the current climate right now, the right conservatives or the right wing is necessarily very contingent on negative campaigning. That is to say that leaders like Trump and like other like like right wing leaders or right wing like conservatives are more likely to focus on like hating on the center left or like using these things to like bash their label or necessarily give them like a bad reputation at the end of the day. And that's the tactic that people use. But at the point at which the center left focuses more on welcoming these people and using less negative campaigning in order to gain these voters and to gain this demographic, we think that we still get the moral high ground in terms of one, like allowing these center like the people that are on the edge or people that are less likely to buy into these like like more less strategic things that are or that focus more on fear tactics. So in order for us to gain those supporters, but the point at which we probably also look like catering to the people who are still like at the point at which the only thing that's like that is the border at which they are going to support the left or the right is just because of the their beliefs on like less information. We think that at the point at which we still have the moral high ground on that, we still get the better side of the individuals at the end of the day, right? So when we talk to you about the mechanisms of whether this is not going to to work or not. We think that affirmative side is going to prove is the only thing to prove to you why this is likely to gain these supporters at the end of the day. So in conclusion, what did we tell you? One, we told you that this is in the best interest of the center-left party to gain more supporters. But two, we also told you why this is going to work and why we're likely to succeed and actually cater to these less educated voters at the end of the day when we get more seats in the Senate. With all these reasons, proud to propose.
All right, thank you very much. Can we invite the second negative speaker to continue the case for the negative team? Here.
Cool. Just to confirm if I'm clearly audible and visible. Awesome. I hope there's no distortion in my voice because we are running on mobile data right now. Awesome. Okay. I'll just switch off my video. Sorry. Yeah. I'll just start my speech in 5 seconds. Switching on my timer. Cool. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1, and go. Panel a world where center-left parties beat around the bush. They're not of the right wing or the left wing is a world we clearly do not support, because this is a world where they lose all their original supporters and all the things, all the policies they really stood for. A few rebuttals to the case of side government, of side affirmative, right? Firstly, they told you polarization is more likely on our side of the paradigm. Panel understand polarization is clearly more likely on their side of the paradigm. Fake news is much more likely on their side of the paradigm. Understand that are educated and popular influencers like Elon Musk, who are more likely to use social media and other such mechanisms as an agency to spread their own views, their own propaganda, and the process, they're more likely to be responsible for this sort of disinformation. We think the moment these center-left parties lose the support of such popular influencers, they're very, very likely to be detrimentally affected in their campaigns itself, right? We think less educated influencers are not really likely to have that kind of agency and that kind of influence in society, especially through mechanisms like social media, and hence they're not really likely to be able to spread their own campaigns of this center-left party that we're talking about. Secondly, they told you about how you're not really likely to lose original supporters, and this point is clearly not important. Finally, understand this is one of the most important contentions that we give to you on side opposition, because we told you that because the incentive for them to stay, because they're not really likely to lose original supporters, because understand that we told you that there are very likely to be trade-offs on Gulf side of the paradigm, where you cannot really be purely leftist or purely rightist. You'll have to beat around the bush and try to appeal and kiss ass both sides of the paradigm, and hence these parties are not really likely to receive the same amount of traction that they normally could, right? So this party cannot hinge on both sides. It'll have to stick to its original supporter base, which is the reason these parties are staying in power today, right? So they told you about how there's more likely to be dissemination of information. We told you how this is not really likely. So understand how this plays out in campaigns. We also think campaigns are going to be largely one-sided to very, very extreme leftist parties. As we clearly told in our first speech, the rich will be widely alienated, and as a result, a lot of votes will not come from the rich, and support from the rich and educated in campaigning will decrease significantly. Hence, the sort of resources that this party will have in terms of framing the manifestos and strategic voting and strategic campaigning, like targeted campaigning using modern technology like artificial intelligence and machine learning, will no longer be easy to access, because the educated are no longer supporting this party anymore. This means that these resources are very, very likely to be readily provided to other leftist parties in order to support the campaigns, and hence this sort of campaigning is likely to bring in more awareness about policies and become a better form of marketing for these particular parties. This means that the campaigning of this particular center-left parties that we're talking about is very, very likely to weaken and die out in the short run, and the less educated people that they care so much about is very, very likely to not even hear about them altogether, because of the fact that these modes of campaigning have been proved to be extremely effective, and they are controlled by highly educated people, like people who are well-versed with programming and so on and so forth. Secondly, they say that information and knowledge is what is stopping these people from voting for the left. This is the exact patronizing attitude that has driven these people away from the left. This is the same attitude of the left that they hate. The fact that they're treated as ignorant buffoons preschool children that do not understand how the world works and what is better for them. Which is why Kamala Harris gets hate when she talks like she's talking to children, right? So even in, let's consider Gov's best case. Gov really wants to try to fool less educated voters into believing that they'll only be catering to them once they come to power. Understand how this works. Even in their best case, if this political party comes to power, they're very often going to be subject to lobbying by multinational corporations that consist of the most qualified and educated class of people. These organizations are very, very likely to manipulate the party into framing policies and standing for such policies that only tend to the more educated class of people once they get into power. So these educated people won't really care about whether or not they get their policies in campaigning. They care about how it gets executed once they get to power. So this looks like tech giants able to drive the parliament into framing policies on privacy and data collection rather than factors that directly affect the less educated people, like poor quality of schools in their neighborhood, underpaid teachers in their neighborhood, and so on and so forth. This is going to ignore the problems faced by such less educated communities and really be detrimental for them. As a result, the party is going to face widespread media hate and be the subject of controversy, as they were not really true to their campaigns, not true to their promises, and gave false promises only to garner votes. So even in Negative's best case, even if they come to power, they're very, very likely to get removed through no confidence motion or will never be elected to power ever again, and the less educated people because of the fact that the less educated people will be largely distraught because they were essentially being used to gain votes and get this party to power. So what happens on our side of the paradigm is this center-left party continues to support the policies they originally stood with, right? They continue to support abortion and LGBTQ rights and so on and so forth, which means that status quo is going to be much, much better off. We'll prove to you why the rich will vote for other leftist parties even further, even if you do not buy all the analysis I gave you before. This debate is an active debate. You conceding to the fact the original voter base is going to drift away to the far left means you're literally conceding this debate, since this debate is an active debate. So if the center-left parties get less votes on your side of the paradigm, you literally lose this debate since the center-left party loses out. You talk something about the debate is actually about the shift of the political leaning of less educated and educated people. But this is clearly not true, because you say it is absolutely fine if the center-left party loses votes as long as you have left-leaning voters going to far-left voters. That means that there is more polarization on your side, since you have already proven how a good chunk of right-winger voters are not going to be persuaded. And isn't this where you already lose the debate, since you literally said that the party loses votes, right? So if you concede to this, you clearly lost this debate already. I do not really think I need to give this deputy speech altogether. And we think we've clearly given you very, very clear mechanisms as to how we're going to be better off on our side of the paradigm. We gave you a lot of extensions as to how this info, even in their best case, this party is clearly going to lose out and get a lot of negative media attention on their side of the paradigm. They talked about less educated people likely to follow dissemination of information. Panel understand less educated people do not really have as much access to social media and do not have as much access to campaigning areas, which means that often these parties don't really campaign in such areas because of the fact that they're not really likely to receive traction altogether. This means that less educated people are very, very likely to not listen to these campaigns altogether. They're not even likely to know that this party even exists and the sort of policies that they're even standing for. We think we're definitely going to get much better supporters, because our party has a very, very clear stance on the right and the left. They are a clear left party, and they will prove that their liberal views are going to garner more votes in the future. We're definitely going to attract the same voter base that we always did, the one that supported them and got them to power. And we're also going to get a lot of moderates to our side of the paradigm because of the fact that the Biden administration is not doing well. So there's a lot of scope for other leftist parties to prove that they can actually correct the mistakes that have taken place. For all these reasons, I'm extremely proud to oppose.
All right. We thank that speaker for that speech, and we invite the third affirmative speaker to sum up the constructive segment of the debate for the affirming side. You're here.
Hello. Oh, wait. Hello. Okay. PM. I'll just set up a timer. Okay. starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. The increased political polarization that negative side is so willing to trade off is the very exact same tool that those in the authoritarian right, the politicians, they use that. They try to divide the voter populace and to try to keep the people who feel disincentivized, the people who feel failed by the system which is supposed to protect them, right? And that reason, that problem is what we're trying to fix here in affirmative. We're trying to lessen the divide between the educated and uneducated in order to gain as much votes as possible so that the main actor of this debate, the center-left party, can get into power and promote their policies. Two exchange rebuttals, the rest are integrated into my issues, right? Number one, the entirety of the negatives case from the first to the second speaker hinges on the assumption that when you are an uneducated voter, you are automatically going to probably be an super radical right-wing Republican, whatever, who hates immigrants and the gays or whatever. Why is this completely untrue? This is already disproven 30 minutes before the motion even started. Because if you look at the info slides, it still proves how the most radical Republicans are still the middle to higher class white average, like grandsons of plantation owners. They're still the most radical, are still going to be the most rich, right? The reason that there's an increased leftist votes for more educated people is because education has been more attainable at the end of the day, right? But even if they are, so this is untrue that just because you're uneducated, you're probably going to be right wing. And the fact is that even if we try to be as charitable as possible, that even if we try to take them at their best case, that maybe even what if like these uneducated, not as educated people are somehow more inclined to radical right-wing thought of thinking, right? The only way to change that problem is to humanize them in order to change their ways. It is not impossible to change the minds of radicals. Don't believe what negative has been trying to tell you. When those radicals themselves are what enables your opposition to talk shame about you and to produce policies that go against your agenda. So we tell you that in order to the reason you need to convince them is because they're what's enabling Republicans or right-wing Republicans to do leftist policies or whatever. Right? On the second rebuttal, on the notion of false promises, how center somehow they try to tell us that center-left parties will receive a lot of backlash because they're lying to like conservatives and they try to get their votes, but then suddenly they're not going to do conservative policies or whatever. This is still untrue. Why? Because the very notion of center-left parties, they're still pretty leftist. They're unlikely to just flat out lie to people and promote just flat out lie because they know that they're going to receive the backlash. The problem is they're mischaracterizing our entire case because we're trying to focus on the attribute of being uneducated. We're not trying to focus on the political attribute of being right-wing conservative at the end of the day. When you're specifically catering to the needs of the uneducated, we're trying to posit to them these social issues that are affecting them at the end of the day in order to help change the way they see the world, to help change the way they see societal issues when the reason they are uneducated isn't really their fault because it's the societal oppression and the barriers that are present in both sides of the house, right? Two specific clashes, and let me tell you why we can both them. Firstly, where do center-left parties get more support, and how come we're okay with getting the support of more like radically right-wing inclined people at the end of the day, right? What did negative try to tell us, right? Negative tried to tell us that if we do this policy, then the traditional support of the center left, so Democrats, moderates, etc., traditional leftists, will go to the radical left and we will lose support. Why is this untrue? Because if you look at the analysis of the incentives of central left voters support the central left party and not the radicals, there are two main things that Jean told you. Number one, they support the central left because they don't like the radical aspects of the left. They think that it's too communist or it's too like far-fetched, or they think that they're too like out of the mainstream. And number two, they do it because they don't like Republicans, because they don't like the they don't like conservatives. They attribute themselves with more leftist politicians. What does this mean? So it doesn't mean that it is still less likely that they're gonna suddenly shift to the radical left, because that very notions of the harms of the radical left, like for example, they're probably like super altruistic, they're too radical for their own good. They're still gonna keep those. They're still gonna keep those notions in their head. Just like how majority of Joe Biden's support came from states like Michigan and Ohio, with a traditionally lower educational rate. The only reason he was able to get those battle states that made him win at the end of the day is because he humanized themselves, the more traditionally uneducated voters, and he was able to get the majority in those specific states, right? But even if we try to be as charitable as possible, that even if they go to the radical left, why are we? And this is not conceding, by the way. This is just being as charitable as possible. Even if they go to the radical left, why are we better off? Number one, the support that we gain from moderates or uneducated right-wing who are more likely to think moderately, which they have already conceded, will probably make up for the numbers of the difference. But second, the difference. But second, make up the difference. But secondly, what's more important is, at least on our side of the house, you're better to penetrate conservative echo chambers, because the lower educated, like probably conservative people are in those specific echo chambers. So when you change their minds, you have a higher chance of changing the minds of other more moderate conservatives and even more radical conservatives at the end of the day. Because when they see that a trusted friend of them who was also a fellow conservative changed their mind and became a central leftist instead, they're more likely to listen to them because they trust that person as a friend or as an individual, right? So what's the conclusion of this? Right? Firstly, we have disproved their whole they're going to go to the radical left case by providing you through incentives of the voter base why they will still be probably loyal to the center left party out of the fear of radicalization from both sides of the political spectrum. But we tell you that even in our worst case, which is being as charitable as possible, which opposition never even tried to do, even if this went to the radical left, the moderate uneducated votes can make up the difference, but can actually increase the voting numbers because they can convince other more radical conservatives who are part of their specific echo chambers to switch to the central left policies and politicians, right? Why is this important? So why is this issue so important? We tell you that at the end of the day, this specific issue tells us how we get more votes, and why more votes is the number one priority for the central left party, who is the main actor, because they need the votes to get the policies passed in order to get their platforms passed through Congress and Senate or whatever. The second clash of this debate is where do we better keep up with center left political values, right? What did negatives try to tell us at the end of the day? Negatives try to tell us that when in our side of the house, somehow central left parties become more right wing and they have less value purity insofar as they're betraying their leftist values, and this is going to push away votes. Why is this untrue? Firstly, I've already told you how they're still going to be leftists at the end of the day, so they don't have an incentive to just lie and like suddenly support anti-immigration policies because of their leftist nature. But we tell you that even if that we get less support because of the quote-unquote left center left, people see us as left center left values. Why are we still okay? It's okay because we tell you that it's okay to diversify your voting pool. What do we mean by this? We tell you that in their side of the house, when they're primarily relying on a single voting a single voting block, specifically educated people who are more leftist at the end of the day, we tell you how it's more volatile. Support is more volatile when you in their side of the house. Why is it more volatile? It's more volatile because because people's minds can change on a whim. So what does this mean, right? This looks like how suddenly Democrats are seeing that they don't really like the center left party anymore, or what at the end of the day, right? So what does that entail, right? That means that when you have in their side of the house, you rely on the specific demographic. This means that when they change their mind, you're screwed. Compared to our side of the house, when you're more likely to convince different demographics of people. So that even in your worst case, when you lose some support because something you did, at least you have other people to still back up your support at the end of the day, right? Because the fact is that in status quo, the center left wings party has to adapt to the current political situations that is happening. Where in traditional leftist values need to be changed because they aren't seen as more palatable the majority who are moderates at the end of the day. Why is this so important for the party and this main actor? We tell you why diversifying the voting pool leads to a less volatile and less over reliance on a one specific demographic. And it also proves how this lessens the gap and lessens polarization, because this disproves the narrative that the left only caters to the rich and educated, and how a lot of rural people think that the left only cares about the big city, when we disprove that by saying that, oh, actually this is not true. They also cater to the more less educated and more rural people, and that's how they get the vote, and that's how they win.
All right, thanks. Can we have the third next?
Okay, am I audible? All right, give me some time to set up my timer and I'll begin then. Okay, beginning my speech in 3, 2, 1. Most of affirmative's case focuses on proving that they will actually be able to bring about any buy-in amongst less educated voters. They fail to do so, and their burden is so much more than that. Firstly, a lot of their case does not take into account the fact that this is an actor motion. So their benefits regarding polarization and general society do not stand. So let's judge this debate based on, let's see what benefits to the party they bring in, right? Before I move on, I'd like to clear I'd like to call on a shady move that the app just did. Firstly, I hope that the app does realize that rich white is limited in numbers, so they cannot comprise an electoral majority. Also, the motion info slide reads, while it is true that the richest voters vote conservative, where does it ever say that the majority is that way? This is an extremely shady move from app, so we hope that you do not credit that argument. Okay, now coming on to my responses. Firstly, they tell us that just because no other they do not, just because the voters of this party like this party, they aren't going to vote for any other party, no matter how much their parent party betrays their trust. We give you several mechanisms as to how disgruntled voters have other alternatives. They have other alternatives like not voting at all in their best case, where they like no other party and do not like their parent party as well. People just withdraw from the electoral process and they do not vote. And even then, they have not given you any reason why people are so loyal to the party, that their entire voter base is so loyal to the party that they will not they will not ditch the party the moment the party goes against their values and their traditions. So they are being uncharitable at that. They give you other benefits like breaking the echo chamber. Firstly, we do not see how that's basically a benefit to the party, as long as that does not, insofar as that does not bring about a lot of voter buy-in. This is like an extremely unlikely process, because of the reasons we have given you why people are set in their views, and why the views that that app wants to impose on such people is directly opposite to their worldview and is a great shock to their worldview. We explain to you how this breaking of echo chambers is increasingly unlikely. Also, we do not understand why this needs to be achieved at such great a cost, at the great cost of losing voter buy-in and losing your base. They say that we are going to put in sincere effort in trying to get people to our side, and that will work. Firstly, never worked in history, do not know why it will work for them. Secondly, we show you that's impossible because of all the analysis about why people are set in their views. And also, even if people were agreeable in their best case, the sheer scale of the operation makes their benefits highly improbable. Also, people do not trust this party, right? The reason why they have been flocking to the Republican Party, in spite of the Republican Party acting against their interests often, is because they do not trust the Democratic Party. They do not believe what the Democratic Party tells them. They can always take this information dissemination operation as propaganda, as efforts to manipulate them into voting against their interests. So they do not explain why that won't happen on their side and why there will be buy-in. Then they try to have their cake and eat it too. We will adjust to the right, at the same time maintain ideological integrity. Do not know how that works, because we have shown you that the gap between the uneducated and educated is huge. So just arguing based on leftists and rightists and how some leftists might be moderate is not going to work, right? The educated leftists and the uneducated rightists have large gaps in their worldview, which we have shown to you and which we have characterized to you, and they have not taken that into consideration while making this argument. They say information and knowledge is what is stopping these people for voting from the left. Congratulations, you have fallen into the same exact trap that the leftist parties have fallen in for years, which has actually caused this change about why the uneducated voter now votes Republican. People do not like you being this patronizing. People do not like you coming up to them and telling them what's good for them. They do not like you coming up to them and telling them that they do not know anything about how the world works, and what you tell them is the sacred truth. So again, we are not sure why that will work, since in the status quo people are very hostile to this approach. Again, they try and tell you that they do not necessarily need the support of their base. Firstly, we give you clear reasons as to why people are disagreeable to change in their views. So they aren't going to gain voters at the same rate at which they lose support from their base. So they are at net, they are losing support. So they cannot simply fiat that you do not need to cater to your base. Secondly, people and they do not respond to this argument, apart from a hand-waving argument about how liberal democracy means that people are more receptive to leftism. Understand that that's not what a liberal democracy means. The liberal democracy means that the spectrum is relatively shifted to the left. That does not mean that division between right and left does not exist. Right, the spectrum in the absolute is shifted to the left. At the center of the spectrum is leftist in consideration of the global and with respect to the global average, maybe. So that's a mischaracterization of a liberal democracy. So again, they do not respond to any of our arguments about how they lose supports of the entire support of minorities at all. They do not tell you why it is, because we tell you that this is an especially exacerbated harm, because minorities are a surefire bet for the leftist party, right? They vote leftist regardless of whether they're educated or uneducated, because it so happens that leftists are the only people who look after their interests. But to play into this majoritarianism tactic, they will have to ignore the interests of such minorities, and then such minorities will resort to other sources, especially to radical leftist alternatives, or in their best case they'll stop voting, which is still harmful to the liberal party because they are losing support. Again, polarization, there's a lot of talk of polarization. We firstly don't see how that is relevant to the debate, because it's an actor motion, and even if we can win despite of polarization, or even if that the chances of the Liberal Party are heard on their side despite of there being more polarization, we think we take this debate. But even there, we show you how their approach is patronizing, how their approach is manipulative, which is why polarization is much likely to be more on their side, both in the short and the long term. Then they give you a few hand-waving arguments as to why people will, people might change their mind on a whim, so it's better to cater to everybody. See, this jack of all trades, master of none argument does not want, because people again are set in their views. People carry along, people adopt ideologies across generations, right? There's a reason why every red state has been a red state for 150 years in the United States, and people did not just wake up one day and decide that, oh, let's vote Democrat, it will be fun, right? So we do not see how they can fiat that. And finally, the biggest problem with their case is that their case is largely based on false promises, right? They say that we will go to the voters, and we'll be approachable to them. We'll make an effort to look relatable to them. We'll go to them and tell them that we care about you, when we have given you reasons why the leftist party actually does not care about such people, for good reasons or bad, right? So this is a claim based on false promises, and that will be called out both by people inside the party and people inside the party, and shoot people outside the party who will call them on their bullshit, and that will largely largely damage this approach to gaining electoral expansion. So finally, why do we win this debate? We show you categorically that we lose supporters on their side of the paradigm, because you lose support from your base faster than you gain support from gain support from previously uncharted territory. We also show you why their claims of gain are highly unlikely, and we show you how they have not responded to a majority of our case. We take this debate, proud to propose. Sorry.
All right, thanks. Can we have the negatives reply speaker to end the debate as a whole for the negative team? Here.
Yeah, hi, I'm Harsh. I'll be the reply speaker. I'll start in 20 seconds. Right, I'll start in 3, 2, 1, go. This debate is clear. We clearly win this debate because firstly, the affirmative themselves have misunderstood what they have to defend and what their burden is in the motion. Let's start from the beginning. What do we propose? We propose that center-left wing parties stay true to their core values of, say, re-legalizing abortion, of having gun control, allowing immigration, etc., staying true to their core liberal center-left values without having to concede any of them. What this will do is this will retain not only the moderate left-wing core voter base, but also slowly attract moderate right-wingers, as the whip and the deputy have said. This would also mean that it would also attract moderate right-wingers, since the world is slowly becoming more and more polar. There's not just one voting bloc that would remain with the center-left party, as they themselves said. In their pursuit of increasing their voter base, they alienate everyone. In their side, they not only alienate their core voter base by conceding to stuff that the core voter base just can't allow to be conceded. This means that these voter base, these people, the center-right voting people, would move towards more radical left-wing parties. We have proved this in all three speeches. On their side, they will also not gain a good fraction of a voter base of the moderate right-wingers and right-wingers in general, due to the fact that they would not concede to most of their demands, since that would make them a completely right-wing party and they would not remain center-left on this liberal democracy political spectrum. And secondly, they will still need to appease minorities, appease blacks in the US, appease people from African origin descent, appease Latina people, appease people who are gender minorities, etc. They will alienate these right-wing voters further, because what the right-wing voters feel is that these parties, they only cater towards these minorities. They have this presumed notion in their mind, and them appeasing minorities would mean they would alienate these moderate right-wing voters, and right-wing voters
in general even further. What about minorities? They haven't responded to any of our claims about how minorities in their side of the paradigm would never vote for the center left wing party again and would move towards more radical forms of in the political spectrum, move towards more radical parties. They haven't said anything about them. In their side, minorities will be clearly lost as a voter base for the center left party because of the fact that they are now appeasing to the majority population, who's right wingers, and hence they're moving away from their promise of looking out for these looking out for these minorities. These minorities will slowly skew towards the more radical forms of left wing, as the whip and deputy and me in my Lilo speech have told you about. Again, people don't like to be patronizing. The affirmative have not understood this. I have not understood this, that they do not like to be taught everything. They do not like to be treated as their children. This means this is what affirmative wants to do by the center left party. Not only do they want something that has never been done, their main argument is that there is more polarization on our side of the paradigm. Even that is not true. We have already proven to you how a majority of people will move towards more extreme forms in the of parties on the political spectrum. Minorities as well as center left voters will move towards radical left parties. This means the main argument of the harms in our side of the paradigm, there being more polarization, is also false. Most importantly, they have misunderstood the entire motion. The motion is an actor motion. Their side literally concedes to the fact that the center-left party loses voter base. And in fact, even their claims of the society benefiting by having lesser polarization is also false, because we have just proven to you how polarization is more on their side of the paradigm, how people will be more upset with the party on their side of the paradigm, how there are more voters for the center-left party on our side of the paradigm. We clearly win this debate. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Can we have the affirmatives reply? Here, here.
All right, I'll just get my timer. All right. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1, go. One question for the debate. What does the center-left party actually want? We think that the affirmative's burden was just to tell you why they do this, not necessarily prove to you that all of this happens immediately, but even then, we gave you a lot of mechanisms why it's likely to happen anyway. First thing, we want to talk about the inherent interests of a party. Ultimately, we think it's simple, that they just need numbers. So they can't rely on just one group of people forever when times are changing. Obviously, society is going to be volatile at the point at which people are also like in the long-term changing. So we think that in terms of the long-term incentives of a party, we are thinking about our future. We want to maintain our party, so we need more buy-in, and we need to diversify our demographic at the end of the day in order for that to be possible. But moreover, when we contextualize this debate to what the center left wants, they're the exact people who don't think it's these less educated voters' fault for relying on more populist leaders anyway. They're exactly the people who believe it's structural oppression and structures who push them to more right-leaning ideas in the first place. So if that is the case, it's more principally aligned for us that we cater to them in order to, one, provide the information they could not get within their echo chambers, but two, that we correct the fake news, conspiracy theories, and misconceptions that come from the right wing when we talk to you about how this is actually an incentive to correct at the point at which we told you the right focuses more on negative campaigning, and they try to smear campaign all of the left ideals or ideologies in order for you to get to you buy into the right at the end of the day, right? So when we talk to you about secondly the political climate that materializes, we think that it's very important that we lessen the polarization that happens, because when we talk about divisive politics, we think that it only exacerbates when we're talking about negatives comparative, because the party believes that these higher educated people are the only people that are important at the end of the day, because they're the only people that are going to cater to at the point at which your demographic is only catering their policies towards these people. So that's the only time that you actually worsen the class divide, that you now have more educated voters that are progressive be seen as the elitist by the the less educated voters, because we think that they are more important to prioritize in terms of being a party, right? So they label the center left as all of these bad things like elitist, etc., because they know that they're the only ones that they're prioritizing at the end of the day. And we think that you're more likely to not agree in legislation, so you're probably gonna have more protests, more chaos at the ground, because when people are disagreeing at the bottom, you're also going to be disagreeing at the point at which people are winning on the Senate, and then you have different types of leaders, etc. Right? So lastly, when we question where do we actually achieve the interest of the center-left party, we think that there's no positive material coming from negative in the first place. But when we told you a lot of mechanisms to get how we get less educated voters, we told you that one, voters are humanized in the sense that we acknowledge their issues as problems we care about, but two, that we are disproving narratives that the left only cares about big cities and educated people, and that's because that we want the moral high ground over the right-wing parties that necessarily bank on insulting and tainting the other side for gaining supporters, but also because they bank on the idea that we just are elitists and we only care about the people who are on the top and are more educated at the end of the day. We think that it's in our right to be able to principally align ourselves within these less educated voters and give them the information that they need in order for them to actually make rational decisions at the end of the day. But on the vulnerable actors, we think that it's just generally worse off for negative at the point at which there's no less educated voters that are being that are acting as stakeholders for the center left party. So that means you have less. So that means when we told you that they are going to be less incentivized to cater to them and make policies for them, that means that we're also principally not aligned as the center left, who just generally cares about minorities and people on the ground at the end of the day. So we think that it's even worse for the vulnerable actors on negative side when you make sure that this divide is clear, but at the point at which we don't ever actually get the long-term benefit of helping these people at the end of the day, we say that you are worse off at negative side. So at that point, you also probably lose more supporters on negative because these progressive people care about minorities, and because these are not happening at the end of the day because they're not stakeholders, that's worse off. So in conclusion, we prove the center left party interest, we protect the most vulnerable, but we also win more seats and we pass more policies affirm.
All right, thank you very much, all speakers, for that debate. So this is a silent round. You guys will just leave the room, let the judges deliberate. Don't come back. Just wait for the break results to be announced. So yeah, good luck to all. And congratulations on making it this far. Yeah.